Adam Burns here. Let's bring it today on renting versus owning a property. Now, there's plenty of videos out there on the internet on this subject, but most of them try to overcomplicate the decision making. Really, all we have to look at is the simple math problem of what our sunk costs are renting or owning a property. Sunk costs being the money that you spend and you just don't get back. So what are the sunk costs when you're renting a property? Usually, those costs are brokerage fees or money paid to the agent helping you find the property, and the actual rent that you're paying to your landlord. On the other side of things, owning a property also has sunk costs. Those sunk costs when you own a property are usually the interest money that you're paying for your mortgage, insurance, taxes paid to the municipality, and also repairs and maintenance. Now, if we take the simple math of comparing those two figures, we should be able to make a decision fairly easily. From there, it's really a matter of simple math. If we look at the sunk cost of owning versus the sunk cost of renting, and the sunk cost of renting is more than the sunk cost of owning, it makes sense to buy. If the sunk cost of renting is less than the sunk cost of owning, it might make sense to keep renting. For the sake of this argument, let's look at an example. If you can buy a 3-bedroom house for $300,000, and you can rent a similar 3-bedroom house for $2,000 per month or $2,400 per year, let's look at how those costs add up. Let's assume that we're taking an 80% loan, meaning the lender or your mortgage provider is giving you 80% of the home's value. Now, we're doing this because we want to avoid primary mortgage insurance, or PMI. This is an additional cost charged by the bank. If you'd like to learn more about mortgages and their associated costs, please drop us a comment below and we'd be happy to do an episode on it. So if we're taking an 80% loan, that would mean that the bank is lending us $240,000 on our $300,000 purchase. Now, we have to simplify things just a little bit more in order to get at the sunk cost of our mortgage. When you take a new loan, you're actually paying the most interest that you're going to be paying throughout any other year of the loan within your first year. Now, in order to touch on why that is, I'd be happy to do another episode on mortgage payments and what makes them up. Just drop me a comment below and we'd be happy to do it. To make the math more simple, we're just going to calculate 1 year's worth of interest. We're going to assume that the loan balance doesn't change over that period. So if we assume 3.5% on our $240,000 loan balance, that would make our annual interest $8,400, which is slightly more with our simplification, but that's okay for today's use. When we're calculating the sunk cost of our loan, we don't have to concern ourselves with the portion of our monthly payment that goes toward paying back the loan, which is called principal. The reason we don't worry about our principal is because that's still our money at the end of the day. We're just investing it in the real estate, which is called equity. If you'd like to hear more about equity and how to tap into it, comment below and we'll talk about it in another episode. Let's look at the sunk cost of taxes. The rate charged for taxes varies by municipality, but we'll use a national average of 1.1%. On our hypothetical purchase, that would make our sunk cost $3,300. Now, if we look at the national average for our home insurance, it's about $1,200 annually. For our hypothetical house, in a house of this size, we're a little bit less than that, but we'll use the $1,200 just for the sake of this argument. For home repairs and general upkeep, I like to use the 1% rule, setting aside 1% of your home's value per year for general repairs and upkeep. On our hypothetical purchase, this would make our sunk cost $3,000 for 1 year. So if we add up these sunk costs, $8,400 in interest, $3,300 in taxes, $1,200 in insurance, and $3,000 in home repairs and maintenance, that brings us to a grand total sunk cost of owning our home of $15,900 annually. Compared to our rental sunk costs of $24,000 per year in rent, not even considering things like adding in brokerage fees, key fees, credit check fees that would only make the number higher, it seems like a pretty sweet deal. And owning a home actually has some additional benefits that we can't easily break down into simple math. Our previous example didn't take into account appreciation of the home. Real estate markets do tend to trend up or down in the short term, but in the long term, they do trend upwards. So your investment in your property is going to appreciate and increase in value with the market. Additionally, you can customize an owned home. Owning your property allows you to change it to your needs. Renting a home, you have to use it as is. At the end of the day, you need to live somewhere. So you should constantly be running this calculation to make sure that you're making that right decision on where that somewhere is. Homeownership is one of the most powerful investments that you can make, but it's also one of the most useful. Think about it. You can't live in a stock or a bond, can you? Thanks for watching. It was great to see you today. I'm here with my wife Shelby, and we just watched the rough edit of our renting versus owning episode. Oh, and of course my lovely dog Butternut. Shelby has some questions for us that she'd like to ask, and hopefully there's some questions that you have as well.
All right, so you mentioned that buying a home is an investment, and a smart investment potentially, and a property appreciates over time. Can you speak to that a little bit further as to how do I know that it's a smart investment? Is there a limit to that? Even if the economy is good and thriving, that's typically when people tend to also overprice their home. So how do I know that I'm not buying an overpriced property?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly deep question that we can certainly touch on in another episode. But the best way to understand home values in your area, and also to understand what you should be paying and if it's a good time to get into the market, is to work with a local real estate agent. Somebody that has knowledge of the area and the property values and the direction things are headed. They're going to be the best ones because they're in it every day. So they'll be able to tell you if it's a good investment, where you should be looking, and help you with also narrowing down some of your criteria.
Okay, so that's good advice. I appreciate that. So if I'm buying a home, and perhaps this is a question also for another episode, is it better for me to buy a home that's already done to my taste, or buy a home in which I'm pouring more money into it and increasing, potentially increasing, right? That could be a whole something else. Like, how do I know I'm increasing the value? What are your thoughts on that when buying a home? If I want to buy an investment, is it better to buy something already done, or better to buy something that I need to put some sweat equity into?
Yeah, really great question as well. I think that we can dive much deeper into this on another episode as well. You have a lot of great criteria and things to talk about. So just to touch on that briefly though, putting money into a home and that money yielding you greater value in the home is what's called forced appreciation. So you're touching on a theory that goes something like this. So you buy a home for less than market value or lower market value because it needs work. You put that work into it, but the amount of value that you create is more than the amount of money that you put into that work. That being forced appreciation, meaning you're increasing the value through work that you put into the home. So that is a common theory, and it's a common practice amongst homeowners. So you can buy a home that needs some work, you can develop it to your tastes, and thereby doing the renovations, you increase the value of the home. So things that increase the value of the home the most are kitchen renovations, bathroom renovations, and adding square footage, for instance. So if you're doing those things, usually as long as you're not making them too taste specific and only something that you would like, then you're going to see an appreciation or an increase in the value of your home.
Okay. Everything sounds really great in terms of buying a house. I'm wondering though, say I can get enough money together to put a down payment on a house and, move forward in the buying process. Is there a length of time that I should plan to stay in a house for, right? And I don't know if there's an average to how quickly my house can appreciate. I'm sure it depends on size of the home, area. If you could speak to if there's a general rule or to that, first of all. So speak to, is there a general rule to how quickly a home appreciates? And two, if not, what are some factors in deciding how long I should potentially stay in a home for before I buy, without, of course, considering I probably don't want to move my stuff every year. But if my home can appreciate quickly in a year, should I move, or should I plan to be there long term?
So a lot of really good questions all rolled into one there. So no, it's okay. So first question being, how quickly does a home appreciate? I don't think there's any hard and fast rule, because markets and real estate markets in general vary so much by where they're located and a lot of different economic impacts or drivers in the local area. So mostly supply and demand. So if multiple people or a lot of people are moving to an area, home prices are going to go up more rapidly than if people are moving to an area more slowly. Sure. The best way that we can get at a value for how quickly a home appreciates is by looking at historic data. So if we take a long enough look back and say the last 10 years, how quickly have home values increased in a certain area, we can extrapolate that and kind of turn that into a forward-looking model as well. So averaging how quickly or the rate at which home values have increased historically, we can hopefully apply that to the future as well, looking at a very specific area again. Your second question, how long you should stay in a home, I would like to answer probably from a tax perspective. So this is something that I think we should cover in a future episode as well, but if you live in a home for 2 of the last 5 years, you are actually able to avoid the capital gains tax for any increase that you receive. So any gain or any additional value that you receive from the property can be avoided if you've lived in the home for 2 of the last 5 years. So if you live in the house for 2 years and move out for 3, or if you rented it for the first 2 and then you lived in it for the last 3, as long as you've lived in the home for 2 of the last 5 years, you're avoiding capital gains. And again, that's up to a certain limit. So for a single person, that's $250,000, and for a married couple, that's $500,000 of gain. Again, capital gains is one of those things that I'm not qualified to speak on, but I know a certain amount, so I'd be glad to share what I know in a future episode.
Yeah, that'd be great. So basically, as long as I'm in the home for 2 years, I'm not subject to paying capital gains. Is there a limit to that though? Like, say I decide to stay in the home for 5 years, do I still avoid capital gains, or is it only within a small time period?
So that time horizon applies regardless. So as long as it's at least 2 in the last 5 years, you're fine.
Limit.
No limit.
So I could live in the home for 20 years and I don't have to pay capital gains.
Correct.
And is there any benefit to moving out prior to 2 years?
Not that I can think of offhand, but I'm sure that there are reasons out there, and they might be more personal in nature, why somebody would want to move in a shorter period of time.
So essentially, I should plan on staying in a home for 2 years. Say I wanted to stay in a home, fix it up, going back to an earlier question that I had asked. Say I want to stay in a home, fix it up, sell it in a couple years. Again, is there any benefit to buying a home that's already done versus buying a fixer-upper, right? Because if I'm buying a fixer-upper potentially, or not even a fixer-upper, but something that might need a little bit of work, I have to spend more money and time and energy into fixing up that home. Whereas I could buy a house already done, but might have to pay a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I'm buying it less, but then if I spend money, they're kind of the same. So shouldn't I just buy a home already done, I guess?
I think you kind of answered your own question in a lot of ways. So buying a home that's already done is great for a number of reasons. You don't have to put your time and your effort and your blood and your sweat and your tears into fixing it up, because renovation work is work at the end of the day. That's why some developers follow that 2-year rule. They'll actually build out their own home, live in it for 2 years, and then sell it capital gains free and keep moving every couple of years. But I'm getting a little bit off track. So to answer your question, yes, there are benefits to buying a home that's already done. Those benefits aren't necessarily monetary, so you might not receive the same value or the same investment quality as if you had bought something that was a fixer-upper, put a little bit of money into it, and created more of a gain for yourself.
Gotcha. So you're right, there's the potential, you're a developer, right, you buy a house that's already up here at this price and it's done, versus buying a house that's maybe at this price, not done, putting a little bit money into it, still in it for less than what you had bought a house that was done for, but potentially selling it for both the same. So that's what you're saying, is just there's room for creating that margin if you buy a development.
Correct. So creating that margin or additional equity in the home.
Awesome. Well, thank you for shedding light on that.
Yeah.
I think you've answered all my questions. I appreciate your time and I look forward to learning more.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here.